Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we are going to discuss the politics of energy, and we have four, I can count, distinguished guests. Dr. Robert Stein, professor at the Rice University. He's a specialist in political science. Dan Tutcher, founder and principal of Central Coast Capital Advisors, extensive experience in the energy business, as does Peter Fasula, who's co-founder and principal of Envantage, Inc., and finally, our good friend Keir Murray, founder and principal of KLM Public Affairs, and also known as an outstanding Democratic operative. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Also known as the son of Richard Murray.
Well, he's made his own name now.
All right.
Peter, we're going to let you have first crack at it. Let's talk about Keystone Pipeline. Okay, that's a big story. It's going to be a big story this year for political reasons. But we would like an energy company or energy principals thoughts on, do we need to build this? Do we need this energy? Is there environmental threats and a reason to not do it?
Well, Gary, first, yes, we do need to have more Canadian crude oil come down, whether it's through TransCanada or another system. It doesn't really matter. But if you look at what our crude needs are in the United States, we refine 14.7 million barrels a day. And we import about 9 million barrels a day. So we need to import at least 62% of our crude needs. Canada, so far, has been our largest supplier of crude. They supply us about 2.2 million barrels a day. And it's very secure, reliable crude. Now, the controversy over the Keystone Pipeline is we've already got 2 phases of that pipeline already built. And it's delivering crude right now to the mid-continent part of the United States, Cushing, Oklahoma, which is a major storage area, and also to Chicago area refineries. What they wanted to do is extend that pipeline down to the Gulf Coast to supply the U.S. refiners here on the Gulf Coast, which are the most sophisticated in the world that can refine that kind of quality of crude. And also they wanted to bring more crude down from Canada, and that's where the controversy came about. It's our opinion that if we don't have a system, whether it's the Keystone Pipeline or some other pipeline, we may even actually increase the environmental risk both globally and to us. One, we import a lot of crude into the Gulf Coast. So with the Keystone Pipeline extension or some other extension, it would be pipelined into our Gulf Coast refineries rather than coming to tankers. If we don't take the crude from Canada, then most likely it's going to be exported out west to China, and there it's going to be put on tankers, and there's very few restrictions on tankers, so it could be environmentally done. The other thing that a major pipeline system would be to the Gulf Coast from Canada would allow us to do is it would free up, we're producing a lot of domestic production out of the mid-continent, especially the Bakken Shale. That crude is now being trucked and rail. If we had another pipeline system, it would free up other pipelines to handle the increased domestic production. So you never want to truck and rail a lot of crude around. So yes, I do think something like a Keystone Pipeline needs to be built. I think it's going to replace very low-quality crudes that we import from places like Mexico and Venezuela. So I see that it just makes common sense that the pipeline should be built.
Mr. Tutcher is actually a pipeline expert. All right.
Well, that's
let's see you address some of the concerns that some have had, including members of Congress, environmentalists, which say that this is the dirtiest form of oil on the planet that we're going to be moving our way once it's exploited at the forest in Canada, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions to continue down this path, and a somewhat of an investment in an energy industry that we need to be moving away from. How do you address those concerns?
Well, let's talk about the pipeline real quickly, and then I'll address each one of those. But the the real problem we've had with this whole politicization of this particular process involving the XL pipeline is that it's been a bipartisan corruption of the processing plant, processing and permitting procedures that it takes to get pipelines put in, and we certainly need infrastructure, no question about it. So that's been a problem. But the myths that have been out there surrounding this whole issue on the Democratic side, the administration side, were that it's dirty oil and filthy oil, as you just referred to, and that this pipeline is potentially dangerous, crossing very environmental sensitive areas and that type of thing. And now, the third one that's just come up this week is that the Dems have said, well, we don't want the pipeline and we don't want the dirty oil, but if we get it, we don't want you to export it. So that's where we've gone there. On the blunt instrument side of the House and the Senate, they seem to chime in right there too, and they start talking about how wonderful that we got Canadian oil and we have to have the pipelines to get it down there, and so if we don't get the pipelines built, it's going to go somewhere else, then the 20,000 job issue, which I think is extremely inflated and way far out there in terms of what it really produces. So, it's on both sides. But what the real world is that this Canadian oil, as Peter referred to it, is extremely important to the United States. We're hardwired into the third largest bunch of reserves there are anywhere in the world. We've already got pipeline systems that run it down here. We've been connected. We've got a lot more infrastructure to be built, not necessarily Excel, but it's the real safety valve for the United States. I mean, these are our Canadian brethren who have fought with us side by side in wars, and we wake up every day. They're one of the greatest trading partners we've got.
From regimes we can't trust. But Dr. Stein, let me ask you this. Is politics getting in the way of progress in the energy area? Is this just one example?
Let me quote you one poll, and there were three here that I looked at before I came in. They all asked the question about the same way, and I think a fair question. Public support for the pipeline at 57%. So you'd say, well, that's a no-brainer. But, of course, there are 50 states, and elections are run, of course, in each one. But Democratic support for the pipeline, 25%. Republican support for the pipeline, 90%. I think that, in the nutshell, tells you what's going on here. I think this is a big problem for the president, and I think there are two dimensions to it. One, I think there's a new fracture in the debate among environmentalists, and I don't think you guys have touched on it. It isn't really about the pipeline. It isn't about whether the pipeline spills or whether it's dirty oil. It's really about carbon-based energy sources. When you read carefully what the Sierra Club, the National Resource Defense Fund, and other environmentalists are telling us, they're telling us it's not just this pipeline. It's a use of carbon-based, and I'll exclude from that even natural gas. There are people out there, and a significant number, who believe in global warming. I'm not here as a scientist to debate it. What I'm saying, politically, they believe it. They're in states that the Democrats need to win and the president needs to win. And most importantly, after yesterday's decision to accept PAC money, super PAC money under the United decision, the president's looking at large donors who care severely, intensely about global warming and issues of environment. And I don't believe the president can afford, on this issue, to open up the door, so to speak, to other carbon forms. I believe after the election he will. And I think if you want an example of what he will do, look at what he did yesterday on the issue of contraception and the provision of it by faith-based groups under the new health care bill. He basically gave in on that. I think what he has to do here is the same. We've been focused on the Republicans and how much they've been fighting on the right-left continuum. But we've failed to realize that liberal Democrats have the same problem. And I'll offer you a column in the New York Times written by one of the most liberal of columnists, Mr. Nasir, who basically said the pipeline is a no-brainer, we should be doing it, and for the very reasons that have been mentioned here. Nonetheless, there's a significant 30% of Americans believe that global warming is more important than saving jobs in the midst of a recession.
Let me flip back to our energy experts. Okay. All right, if we got rid of carbon-based fuels tomorrow, how would we heat our homes? How do we power our cars? How do we have air conditioning in the Gulf Coast? How do we do it?
Well, we can't get there from. We can't get there.
That's carbon-based.
Yeah,
so.
we just can't get there from there. I mean, we can have solar, we can have hydro, we can have other forms of energy, renewables, but our energy needs are so large they just can't bridge us to the future fast enough. So we have to have carbon fuels. It's the only way we can go. It's a process of evolution, but in the meantime, you just can't stop. We all have to drive our cars home. We have to, heat our homes and things of that nature. There's just not enough renewables or solar to bridge that gap.
Dan, natural gas, is that? I mean, we have lots of natural gas. Natural gas prices are at historic lows because we're producing so much. Is natural gas the answer to what ails us, and maybe even make left-wing Democratic environmental wackos happy. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure you ever do that, but but the natural gas supplies, obviously, are not really at all-time lows. It hasn't been that many years since we were in the 90-cent, $1.10 range for natural gas, and so it's a very cyclical thing. However, this last cycle has produced so many new discoveries and so much addition to the reserve base that it's going to be around for a long time. We certainly, the good news is that our crude oil demand and usage is declining, or it's flat to declining. And so we are trying to move away, but as Peter said, you can't do these things overnight, and you can't convince the American public to just fuel all their vehicles with natural gas overnight. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the education, you don't have those types of things. So it's a gradual transition, but natural gas is unquestionably going to be our way out of the big messes that we put ourselves in the last 40 years.
Kira Murray, you've been watching the Energy and Commerce Committee debates and what's being offered by Democrats there. One of them has to do with, and Dan mentioned the export issue. As I understand it, what Democrats are trying to do is control for the exporting of the refined petroleum products, but letting the others, such as pantyhose, be, let that go, and other, the plastics and whatnot. Is that something that you think is just politically astute, as well as perhaps controlling for the type of materials that the pipeline is built with, which some in Pennsylvania want to be American steel, American products? Are these just political points, or is this serious debate?
Well, I think I'd characterize the behavior by members of Congress on both sides of the aisle in these matters as certainly political in nature. I don't know if I'd include the word astute. The reality is that something like exporting of oil, the markets are going to control. It's based on demand, and the U.S. right now, I think, as the gentleman said, we're using about as much oil as we need right now. So if we are going to refine this oil, whether it comes from TransCanada or somewhere else, and the market elsewhere demands that we can sell it, then fine. But I think that it's important to remember that, for one thing, the Obama administration has not said that they're not going to build this pipeline, and my personal view is in the end it will be built. What they said was that based on the artificial timeline imposed by Congress in December, which they tied a 60-day decision timeline to the payroll extension of the payroll tax cut in December, the administration said, and the State Department said, that based on that window of time, we don't have enough information to make a decision yet. I think it's expected that TransCanada will resubmit its application in October of this year, and I expect eventually this will go forward. But I think it's no secret that the administration's initial initiative to delay a decision on this until 2013 just also happens to coincide with the end of a next presidential election.
So you think it's political?
It's political on all sides. I don't think there's any question about it. And the posturing by Republicans in Congress, as well as some of the decision-making by the administration.
I guess my question for all of you is, do you think, with all the politics going on with this pipeline and the energy from Canada, are the Chinese just going to swoop in and take it, and while we're fumbling around and stumbling and not doing what's right for America, we see the oil go adios?
We wake up about once every 6 months and slap the Canadians square in the face. First it's we talk about their dirty, filthy oil, which in reality, on a global basis, we import oil from a lot worse places than Canada, and a lot worse oil than we get in Canada, not just from a standpoint of the environmental side, but from human rights and all of those issues where some of this oil is imported. But there are going to be, whether we have the XL pipeline, and I don't particularly agree that it'll probably be built, I think there are going to be plenty of other ways to have infrastructure put in the U.S. to get crude wherever we want, including the Gulf Coast. But whether we have it or not really doesn't make any difference. If the Chinese want to buy oil from Canada, they're going to buy oil from Canada. There will be pipelines built to the west. Harper, the Prime Minister, was in China all week this week. His key buzzwords all week were it's a national priority to have a pipeline to the West Coast so that we have alternative markets for Canadian crude oil.
How do you either of you guys help all the rest of us understand how it is that we can make sense out of a political process where we know the congressional leadership that is acting right now, we're talking about the House Republicans, are the major beneficiaries from political contributions from the oil and gas industry? It's probably 80-20. How is it that we can resolve whether or not they're correct or not, or are you just you're just going to register disappointment with the whole campaign finance structure of the of our campaigns.
Well, I would certainly register that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like I said, it's a bipartisan corruption. I don't see it as one side or the other.
Actually, the change in the law when the United decision came down and basically allowed anyone and everybody, including corporations, the focus again was on corporations. But the truth of the matter is when you look at the kind of giving, particularly in the primary season, it's coming largely from individuals. I mean, the Newt Gingrich donor from the casinos in Nevada is a good example of it. I think the problem here is that there's an asymmetry of intensity of preference. People who are opposed to the pipeline, and as I said before, not really because of the pipeline, but because of a bigger issue of global warming and energy usage of carbon-based fuels, they're much more intense about this, and their kind of money is significant. And they're West Coast donors, and you can see it in the industries that are giving this kind of money, particularly entertainment industries. They can have a real sway on it. I agree with Keir. I don't think there's any question this pipeline is going to get built. And the best reason for it is simply what I think the two gentlemen from the energy agency have told us. Right now, demand is down relative to the historical period because of the recession. When demand picks up in a recovery period, whenever that occurs, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 years, you'll start seeing that demand go up. And I think as Prime Minister Harper said it in China yesterday, we're not just building a pipeline to the Gulf Coast, we're building a pipeline to Canada's future, and that also includes the West Coast. Markets are what they are. They're free. I think what this really characterizes, however, is a different debate, and I don't think that debate has yet hit the public's consciousness, which is that as newer generations of voters come in, they look at global warming very differently than probably the 4 or 5 or 6 of us at this table. They see it as a real threat, and I think the strategy in groups like the Natural Resource Development or Sierra is not to stop carbon use, but it's exactly the idea of transition. They want to speed up that transition. They want to see more sustainables, alternatives. And what's interesting is when you see people like the Sierra Club endorsing nuclear power as an energy source, a position that they would not have taken 10 years or 20 years ago.
From the standpoint of the industry, has government done anything significantly positive to advance energy independence for the United States, or have they continued to put impediments in the way?
I think we put basically impediments in the way, but surprisingly, we continue to develop our energy base, despite those impediments. I mean, we are a major producer of natural gas now. We're one of the lowest producers. It's resurging our whole economy in terms of all down the energy value chain of natural gas. We're going to be increasing our crude production also. We were in decline in crude production, and now we're going to be going up. But you have to look at the Canadian situation and say, this is for energy security. I mean, 20% of our imports come from the Middle East. 10% of our imports come from Venezuela. Those are very unstable regions. And here we have a neighbor like Canada that can pipeline our crude to us. And whether it's through TransCanada or some other means, it just makes a lot of common sense to get that crude.
This is not a strictly government bashing argument you're making, I don't think.
No, it isn't. It's just one of, we fought wars over, about the security of supply of energy from the Middle East, and here we're blocking the means to get more independent of that.
Why isn't this more of a national energy issue? Because as I understand it, there are states that are exercising their options as far as regulating shale gas development and the like. We had the government give us land grants for coal. We had the government spending in the New Deal and developed hydroelectric energy. We've had an oil depletion allowance that supported the oil industry since the 20s. Why aren't we having a huge, comprehensive national energy in this country?
There are, 6 old white guys sitting at this table. Ask one of my students that question, and they'll look at you and say, what about global warming? You guys aren't getting it. I mean, it's a small group right now, but 30% severely think that the global warming is a problem. Half of those think it's because of human behavior.
That's fine. So their answer is what?
And
a big war where we kill
I think what they're
hundreds of
suggesting
millions
is
of
that people might want to live in more higher density areas, not need to drive from Katy to Houston every day.
Who's going to dictate that? The government?
David,
I think it's a case of taste and preferences, and those taste and preferences change. Those people will be voting, and they will become a significant portion. And I think for Barack Obama, that's the problem. His constituency. I mean, you might think of what Mitt Romney has as a problem with, let's say, a Ron Paul. He's got 10, 20% of the Republican electorate. But Obama's got, what did you call them, the crazy environmentalists? But they also vote, just like you and I. And their votes.
And they vote in swing states.
They vote 2 ways. They not only vote on Election Day, but they also give money. And when we opened up the floodgates to what we thought were corporate giving from energy industries, what you forget is we're also opening up the floodgates of campaign contributions.
So
of
does that mean
individuals
this
who can
election there's going to be a debate? There needs to be a debate about this issue.
There won't be until the employment situation clears. This isn't an issue. You can talk about energy. Everybody talks about it since Jimmy Carter, the moral equivalent of war. But it's not the moral equivalent when you have 9% unemployment or 8.5% or whatever that number is where you live.
What's the Texas energy policy, Mr. Murray?
Well, I mean, produce as much as we can, right? Look, I'm a native Houstonian, and I recognize the fact that the energy industry is a lot of what makes this town tick, and I don't consider that a bad thing. But in response to your initial question about why aren't we having a discussion about a national energy strategy, I think it's the reason we're not having a discussion about all kinds of national issues. It's because we have no national consensus on anything. We live in a very divided country. It is essentially a 50-50 country. And coming to any kind of consensus, whether it be around energy policy, immigration policy, labor, worker rights policies, any of these hot-button type of issues, is just simply very difficult to get achieved, particularly when you have divided government at the federal level.
Well, the oil industry and the gas industry ought to be able to make the Texas politicians develop an energy plan that satisfies them. It happened in Pennsylvania. I mean, that's a Republican legislature, a Republican governor. They now have fees assessed against all wells for 15 years, $150,000 to $300,000 per well, and the money's distributed to counties and municipalities that are part of the agreement. So they're doing something like that. When are you guys get the state legislature to give us this type of
David, in other
break?
words, by the way, the simple question there is when will you get the state legislature to raise taxes on oil and gas industry? That's his real question.
So what happened in
So
Pennsylvania?
you could take that.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So what happened in Pennsylvania? That's all I'm saying.
Well, from the tax perspective, that's a different issue. But I think the Texas Railway Commission over the years has done a pretty darn good job of regulating the oil and gas industry in Texas. They've been supportive, but yet they've been pretty good on the regulatory side too, and kept a pretty close eye on things. You don't see a whole lot of things implode in the state of Texas or go wrong down here.
They're worried about what chemicals are in the fracturing process, and they're worried about protecting residential areas in Pennsylvania, and they came up with a plan.
Right.
But it's Texas that actually passed a law
Exactly.
that regulated the disclosure. Pennsylvania hasn't done that yet.
Yeah,
in
we
fairness,
were way ahead of the game.
The truth is, fracking is not as extensive here as it probably will be up in Pennsylvania, but it was, and even the feds don't have a law that regulates the disclosure of what
Do
chemicals
we need
are
to
in
worry
them.
about fracking causing us to, I guess, have fire coming out of our faucets and other scary things that some of Generation
There's some
X
great
is telling us
movies
is
made
going to
out there,
happen?
haven't
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's that big of an issue. It's fairly safe, and so that very seldom happens. And the thing is that it's a new technology. It's being developed. Companies are aware of what's going on, and it's just really transformed the natural gas picture here. For
Can
the
we,
city.
and we're getting close to the end, but I want to ask about nuclear power, which we could probably spend days on, but if we simplified the regulations, if we came up with plans, used the new technology, could we make advances in nuclear plants and actually get them built and built safely? I understand now they're the cheapest kilowatt per hour producers of electricity in the country. So is this doable, or should we just forget nuclear?
Well, it is doable. It's just, it's going to take 10 years to build a plant, or 20 years, to get all the permitting done. It's
well, is there a
just,
way to short-circuit all that and still maintain safety?
Drill,
probably
baby,
not.
drill. That's what you're.
You have other
baby
issues
nuke.
like waste disposal and things that are problematic. And candidly, just as a political reality, the disaster in Japan last year, I think, was just an absolute red flag for the nuclear industry overall. You see Europe now moving quickly to get out of it altogether.
We were tiptoeing back into it just on that whole disaster happened.
Of course, that may be related to
what
what the location of the
That's
plant
right.
was, too.
Well, everybody might like nuclear. It makes sense, but nobody wants it in their backyard. That's the problem.
Well, and when we had our last comprehensive energy bill, it was 2005. It was George Bush's energy bill and Republican Congress, and the subsidies then were for biofuels and others, solar, wind, and the like. Was that Congress and that president going in the right direction?
It's as we've talked about, the Green faction is tremendously important anymore, and they're on the right course. But the problem is, you just can't. They weren't on. They did the right thing. I'm not sure they took it in all the right directions. It's not just about building solar panels and building windmills and fuel cells. There are a lot of things that are totally subsidized. And I think if we point our subsidies toward some ways to help the nuclear side of the business in terms of waste disposal.
Or we could also try getting rid of all the subsidies and mandates and let the free market determine it, because there's subsidies and mandates throughout the process for everything.
And even clean coal technology is not a pipe dream. If some of the money that was thrown at it had been thrown at some of these other projects, we'd be much further down the road.
Well, that's what happens when government makes those decisions.
Exactly.
Isn't that right, Keir?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which means that all we have to do is wait for President Paul, and we'll all be in business. Hey, thanks to Stein, Toucher, Fasulu, and Murray. What a law firm you would be. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about our guests, watch the shows, and a follow-up discussion. Also remember to watch the Sunday afternoon Power Block programs, which includes Platts Energy Week, to get up to date about issues affecting the energy industry. Sundays at 4 p.m. on Houston Channel 8. Until next time, get informed and get active.